Hi, everyone. Welcome to FemtechConf2022. I'm so excited to be back as one of the speakers this year. Last year was so amazing. I met a lot of people and I learned a lot also from all the speakers. I'm so excited that you're here as well. I'm glad that you could make it. I'm glad that you're learning a lot. I hope you've been networking with people. I hope you've been taking notes and learning from all the speakers. I trust you're going to have a great time at the session. Please share your learnings, connect with one or two people. If you go for events, try and make some connections because you never can tell when you will need those connections, you know? Okay, so today I'll be sharing about how you can build your CICD pipeline with GitHub Actions. Before we go into the talk, let me do a little introduction about myself. So my name is BukolaJohnson. I'm from Nigeria. I'm currently based in Germany. I moved to Germany last year. I moved to Germany 2020, sorry. I moved to Germany 2020 and it's been so nice meeting a lot of people, connecting with a lot of people from different parts of the world. I work at HelloFresh. I'm a platform engineer at HelloFresh and I'm ambassador for Google Women Tech Maker program. I'm also a volunteer at Code Africa, where we help young women in Africa to come into the tech space. I am so passionate about bringing inclusion into the tech space. I want to see more women like me come into this world of tech. So that's why I try to mentor young ladies. I try to encourage them. I try to help them find their path in the tech world. So yes, you can connect with me on Twitter. My handle is Bukesius, or you can connect with me on LinkedIn by scanning the barcode on the screen. I will really be glad to meet every one of you, if possible. I know that's not possible anyways, but I'll be glad to meet at least some people from this call. Thank you. So today we are going to be explaining some concepts. I'm going to be explaining some concepts to you about CICD. I'm going to be telling you what is CICD in case you're on the call and you don't understand what CICD is about. I'm going to be telling you that, but I want to have an assumption that people on the call would have heard what CICD is at least. Why is CICD important? Or maybe you're here, you've not heard about it. That's totally fine. I'm going to give some brief introduction to make it beginner friendly. I would look at why do you need CICD. Then we would go into an overview of GitHub Actions, which is the reason we are here today, how you can do CICD with GitHub Actions. We are going to look at why should I actually use GitHub Actions and what are the components that GitHub Actions offers. After this, I would do a real life demo where you're going to work with me. I'm going to walk you through it, how we are going to deploy. We will build our Docker application using Golang. We'll build our application using Golang. We'll Dockerize it. We'll push it to a registry, Docker registry, and then we will deploy this application to Kubernetes. After this, I will share some documentation with you because you have to learn how to use documentation when you're working, so you don't have to cram anything. Then I'll be here to answer your questions. So let's move on. Disclaimer. This talk is not sufficient for you to become a pro or a professional CICD master with GitHub Actions, but it's just to give you heads up. It's just to launch you into how you can explore this area. You are meant to go back after the talk and read up and do some practicals on your own, set up your environment. This is a guide, like it's a guide for you to help you move to the next step. So you can get your hands easy and start deploying all by yourself. Yes. So yes, what does CICD mean in software development cycle? What exactly is CICD? When you hear CICD, what are they trying to say when they say CICD? So it's an acronym. CI means continuous integration, and CD means continuous deployment, or we can say continuous delivery. I'm going to come to the place where I would explain the difference between continuous delivery and continuous deployment. So basically, this is a way for you to automate your process. You are trying to automate how you deploy applications, because sometimes ago, I remember when I first started my career in the IT space, in IT, it used to be manual copy, like the developers write the code and then we push it to the server in a way that you have to copy this code, like do SCP copy files manually. So it was crazy. It was a lot of slow. It was prone to error. But with CICD, all of this process is automated. It reduces human intervention. The system does it for you. You just have to set up what you want the system to do. So CI, continuous integration, is, let's assume you are a developer and you work, maybe you developer A and B, you work manually locally on your system. But with continuous integration, what happens is when you work locally on your system, you push this code to a central location like GitHub or GitLab or any source control environments. You push your changes to this environment. And then when you push it to the main branch, when all of you're able to collaborate in this main branch, and you're able to test your changes, you're able to commit and merge your changes, everyone is working on that main branch. You work locally on your system from a branch, and then you push to the main branch. So everything is integrated together. You're able to merge your changes, you're able to roll back, you are able to test, you are also able to deploy multiple times a day. It's really fast to do this. It helps reduce error, and it also helps to increase the developer experience and their capacity. That's continuous integration. So when you write your code, together, you collaborate with your fellow developers, you push your code to a source control environment, like version control environment, like GitHub Actions or GitLab or any other application that does the same thing. Then the continuous delivery part of it, I mentioned earlier that there's continuous delivery and continuous deployments. The difference between these two is that in one, you can deploy your code automatically without manual trigger to say, click and deploy. And the other one, it is automatic. One, in delivery, you have to wait and click on deploy. In deployment, you don't have to wait. It just deploys automatically. You set up your pipeline and everything just deploys. That's the difference between continuous delivery and continuous deployment. I hope that is clear enough. But I'll be on the charts to answer your questions at the end of my talk. So yes, let's look at why CICD is important. Why should I do CICD? Why can't I just copy my code manually the way we used to do years back? You don't want to do that. You want to automate all your process. You want to automate your deployment because number one, it helps you to work efficiently as a developer, as a DevOps engineer. It helps you to also work effectively. You are able to do more with little time. You are able to reduce repetitive tasks that you will normally do over and over again. They are all automated. And it also decreases the time. It's time consuming when you do things manually. But once you can get the automation right, you set up your pipeline, everything, the next time you want to deploy, everything is seamless. You don't have to start over doing the same steps again. You just push your code and it deploys for you, depending on what you have set up in your pipeline. So yes, it's really one of the other importance of CI/CD is repeatability. It helps because when you're able to repeat, if you have done something before, you are able to do it. The system helps you because you are not going to have to do that same process again. So you are able to reuse it as well. You are able to reuse your code. That's another importance of it. Also, it helps you release new features frequently. Imagine if you have to deploy, you have to copy an application from one server to the other. You have to manually do stuff. The time to which you deploy application, the times to which maybe there's a bug, a customer complains of a bug and you want to update or you want to create a new version of your code. If you have to do it manually, it takes a lot of time. So these are some of the benefits of CI/CD, why you have to do CI/CD. You're able to release new features frequently. So yes, let's move into GitHub Actions. So what exactly is GitHub Actions? There are so many CI/CD tools. There's Jenkins, there's CircleCI, there's Semaphore, there's Travis CI. There are a lot of them. GitHub Actions is one of them and is a very amazing tool. I recently started using it and I've fallen in love with it so much. It's one of the continuous integration and continuous delivery platform that you can use to automate your pipeline. So we talked previously in the previous slide about CICD. So this is a tool that helps you achieve CICD. So that's why we're looking at GitHub Actions today. Yes, it helps you automate your deployment pipeline, and it's a continuous, like I said, it's a CICD, continuous integration, continuous delivery platform. With GitHub Actions provides you with some hosts, like they are called runners, where you can run your pipelines. Like they have Linux, they have Windows, they have Mac OS virtual machines, and but you can also go one step further. If it's for an enterprise use and your company can afford it, you can have a self-hosted runners in your environment as well. Yes, so let's look at doing CI/CD with GitHub Actions. GitHub Actions is a GitHub solution. It offers you some workflows that you can use to build your code in your repository, and it also helps you to you're able to run your test in the same workflow as well. They host all of the they have runners where you can use, where your code run, like your CI pipeline runs in a runner. It's like a server, but it's not self-hosted. You can also have self-hosted, but majorly if you're using it for your training or just yourself, you can use the GitHub hosted virtual machines. So what happens with GitHub Actions is when you set up a CI in your repository, what I mean by CI is when you set up like your workflow in your repository, which we are going to look at in the demo time, GitHub would analyze this code in the repository, and then it will recommend a CI workflow for you. It will recommend what you should use for your pipeline. Depending on the application, it sees in your code. If it's a Golang application, it recommends a boilerplate, like a sample workflow. If it's a Python app, it recommends a Python workflow. If it's a Docker app, it recommends stuff you can use for your workflow to get you started. Let's look at some of the components of GitHub Actions. So what happens is that, looking at the screen, we have a job, we have events. I would explain all of these components. We have events, we have runners, and we have jobs, we have steps. So you set up your jobs with several steps, depending on what you want to do. Maybe you want to build an image, you want to run a command, you want to run a bash script. There are several steps that can be under a job. So a job is like a collection of steps. You can configure your action, your workflow to run based on triggers. Let's look at some of these components. We have 5 components of GitHub Actions. We have the workflow, we have events, we have jobs, we have actions, and we have runners. We will be looking at each of them in details in the upcoming slides. So with workflow, what happens is your workflow is the main file. Let's say you have your repository, you have like you can name it maybe main.yaml or ci.yaml, or anything that relates to what you're trying to do. And it's a YAML file that is configurable. You can adjust this, you can edit this as you want. You have to create it in a directory, the root of your repository.github/workflows. When we do the demo, I'm going to show you all of this. You can have multiple workflows in one repository. You can have workflows that will do multiple action, multiple process, like multiple steps. Yes, so you can have hundreds of workflows, you can have tens of workflows, 5 of workflows, depending on what you're trying to do. And then you can define jobs inside of these workflows. Let's look at the second component, events. So what are events? Events are they are activity that happens that trigger your workflows. Let's say, what do I mean by that? You can say you want this workflow to only be triggered when there's a push events. That means when someone pushes to your repo, when you push a code from your local to the upstream. Or you can say you want it to trigger only when there's a pull request. You can even drill it down and say, I want it to only trigger when there's a push request to a particular branch, not just the master. There are so many triggers that you can set up to trigger a workflow. The pull request, which I mentioned, the push request, the push and the commit. You can also do on schedule and say, oh, I want this workflow to only run daily. Maybe you have a cron job in the workflow. There are so many triggers. In the documentation, I will show you during the demo, the triggers that you can set up for this. Then we have the jobs. Like the jobs they contain several steps. In your workflow, you can set up several jobs. You can have multiple jobs. You can have one job to build. You can have one job to push. You can have another job to publish. You can have a job to deploy to any environment. So depending on what you're trying to do, you just need to choose the runner that you want the job to run on, the kind of runner you want it to run on. You can also put conditionals that I want this job, particular job, to only run when an event happens. Then we have actions. So what are these actions? The reason we use GitHub Actions, okay, GitHub Actions is what we're talking about, but there are actions in GitHub Actions. So these actions are like custom applications, and maybe you have a process that you perform all the time. You want to like create an action out of it, and there's a marketplace where you can put this action that other people can actually use it as well. So we will see some actions when we start the demo. Instead of repeating tasks, you can make them into an action and let other people use it. You can also use it in your workflows, in several other workflows as well. So any task that you frequently repeat can be turned into an action. After all, we're talking about automating all the process. So that's one other way to action in GitHub Actions. So yes, I talked about runners before. Runners are, just look at them as your servers, but they are not your own. They are GitHub Actions hosted runners. You can also have yours, and that's where all your code runs, basically. All your pipeline runs, basically. So why should I use GitHub Actions? What are some advantages I'm going to be getting if I use GitHub Actions? Number one, it's very simple. It's very easy to set up. That's the first thing. It's easy to set up compared to other CI tools. And you don't actually need any dedicated resource. You don't need to spin up any instance. You don't need to do anything. You just get started and you run it for free, depending on the capacity. But if you're using it in the company enterprise, yes, of course, you have to make some payments if you have a lot of jobs running. You can check out the pricing and the capacity on the GitHub Actions page. The other benefit is that it's actually also fully integrated with GitHub. So you don't have to set up any webhook. You don't have to do any extra setup to get your pull request or your issues or comments or any triggers you want to set up. You can also share your actions publicly. That's one good benefit. So it's reusable. Once you have an action, you can share it for others to use, which is really fantastic, which is really good. And it reduces the manpower time that you need to spend doing stuff. Also, it supports any language. It's not restricted. You can you can have any language. You can use it to deploy any language: Golang, Node.js, Python, whatever technology you choose. GitHub Actions supports it, which is pretty awesome as well. So yes, we will be moving into the demo shortly, and I hope you've been able to learn a thing or two from my talk. Let's look at what we'll cover in the demo session. So for the demo, we are going to be deploying a Golang application, which is a very simple application that's renders some HTML files. We would look at how to deploy this to Docker up. Okay, no, we will look at how to deploy it to Google Registry and how to push it to Google Registry, and how to deploy it to Kubernetes. And I hope after the demo, you are able to do all of this by yourself. So these are the steps we are going to be going through. We're going to be we'll clone the repository, which I've already cloned. I've cloned the repository already. But if you want to do this on your own, yes, the first step is you have to clone a repository you want to use. Or the very first step is to write your code and then clone the repository locally. Then you would create a workflow directory where you put this workflow and your manifests. You create the YAML files, you commit your changes, and you monitor your progress, and then you're done. So let's go into the demo. Okay, so let's look at the demo. We are going to be deploying a sample Go application that renders some HTML templates, like I said before. So I have this repository, GHA demo, which was cloned from Golang sample app from Kahotali, and it does some HTML rendering. I've cloned this locally to my system, and we have it here. We are going to run, this is the main application that listens on port 8080. So I'm going to run it so we can see what we expected. We can check what we are expecting to see, localhost 8080. So these are the things it just renders, like just some sample templates, sample messages. So the very first thing we want to do is to come to the repository, and we look at, for now, we don't have any actions because we've not set it up. Github Actions actually supplies you with some templates that you can use, because it will look at the language that is in your application and suggest some templates for you to use, some manifests. So this is Go and Docker image, because you can see some Go application, you can see Docker file. That's why I suggested this. So we can actually just copy this and use it, or we could create our own. So it's one or two things. So we can actually copy it and use it. And let me just explain a bit. So this is the name of the workflow. It is named Go here, but you can name it anything you want. It can be deploy Docker or Docker image or push Docker image. Just make sure you name it with something that you want others to be able to know what you're trying to do. And these are the trigger events I mentioned earlier. That do you want it triggered on push or on pull requests? This is line 7 and line 8. Line 4 to line 7. And there are some jobs. The first job is a build job that runs on this runner Ubuntu latest and uses this action checkout version 3 to check out the repository into the runner, so the runner can have access to this, your repository, just like you clone locally. The runner is also, you're cloning it into the runner locally, into the runner, sorry. And then it sets up Go for you, and it builds, then it tests. So for now, we can use the template, or we can actually use ours. Due to time constraints, I'm going to just show us how we can do that. So the first thing is we want to make a directory called workflows. Make a directory called, sorry, I'm going to remove that. Make a directory called Github Actions, Github. Make directory .github, because if you look at here, that's what he created. It's going to create a directory .github and a directory called workflows inside .github. And that's where we will then create our file. Make directory, workflows. Then we will go into the workflow and we can create our file. So this is a directory. We can create a file, name it maybe deployed or YAML or something. Or we can say ci.yaml. And we paste the very first step, the name, the triggers, the event that will trigger, and the jobs. For now, the job is empty. I'm going to just, okay, let's look at, there's a documentation, because we are going to be deploying to Google Registry. We're going to be pushing the application to Google Registry, and we will be deploying to Kubernetes. So my assumption is that you already have some knowledge, even if it's some basic knowledge of how Kubernetes runs and how Kubernetes works. And also you would already have a project set up in your accounts. So I already have a demo cluster. This is my demo cluster that I'm going to be using for this application. And I already have a service account that I've created, which is not part of this demo, but those are like prerequisites that you need. There's a documentation here for all that you need. You don't have to cram anything. There's some good documentation on how to deploy to Kubernetes engine, how to deploy to Amazon, how to deploy to Azure, or even if you just want to push your email to Docker Hub, there's always a documentation on this page, on this site, where you can get all of this. So those are my assumptions that you know how to use Kubernetes already. And if not, you can still follow through, and after the call, you can get your hands busy and learn some things. So the first thing we are going to be doing is we're going to create the jobs, the set of jobs that we need. The very first job that we want to create is to check out the repository, sorry. We're going to first check out the repository. We can name it whatever we want. We can say build, publish, deploy. Just make sure what you name it, it signifies what that job is going to do and runs on the virtual machine you want it to run on. You check out so that these are the steps in the job so that the runner can have your code. That's the next thing. But before we proceed, let's set up some environment variables, which we are going to be using for this job. The essence for environment variable is so you can consume it in your deployment, and you don't have to keep repeating those values. You can just call them and refer to it. So the very first one is the project ID. And you would have to actually create some secrets. Those are the prerequisites as well. You should have some secrets for your workflow to be able to connect to Google or any environment you're deploying to. So I already set up some secrets in this repository. You click on settings, and then you come to secrets, and you click on actions. You see I have the secrets. The GKE project is the ID of the project ID. And the GKE SA key is a service account key in JSON format that would allow me authenticate from the CI pipeline to the repository to my Kubernetes cluster. So let's continue. So I've defined that here. I'm calling that secret from the workflow. Then the cluster name, which I showed you here, the demo cluster name, the zone where my cluster is, the deployment name, and then the name of the image. That's the very first thing you want to do. And then we have the job, the steps to check out, which I was saying before. The next thing we would do here is we are going to set up G-Cloud CLI. We're going to set up the G-Cloud, which is another step. We're going to set up the CLI using these environment variables. We are calling this action. You remember I told you there are some actions that you can use if someone has already written it. Instead of you typing all the commands to get CLI, maybe install, maybe coil or call command or wget, you can actually use an action that already has all of these commands. So we declare the service key and the project ID as well. The next thing we're going to be doing is to configure Docker so that G-Cloud command line tool. We're going to configure Docker, to use the G-Cloud command line tool. So that's the next thing, the next step. And we're going to be running this command, which if you're running locally, you would have written this command as well. But we're putting all of this. These are steps that you would have done locally if you want to do all of those things. We're putting it in an automation and in our pipeline. The next thing is to get the GKE credentials so we can deploy to the cluster. So we are using this action, Google Github Actions, to get credential. One way to check all of these actions, you can just copy it and go to Google and check it out. Google Github Actions. So there are so many actions. You can check for the one we're looking for. Google GitHub Actions. Oh, sorry, the one we're looking for is GKE Get Credentials. Yes, we're looking for GKE Get Credentials. So this is an action that has already been written that you can use to get credentials. So that's why we're able to, and it gives you an example of how you can use it, which are here. So that's why I said, don't cram anything, just always fall back to your documentation. The next step we want to go through is to build our Docker image. we're going to be running this command, Docker build. We're going to be tagging it, and we are going to be using the build arguments. After building it, what's the next thing we need to do is to publish it. That's like pushing it to the image registry. And we're using Docker push to this image registry. After that, we're going to set up, customize. And what is customize? Customize is a way for you to adjust your, it's for Kubernetes, because I'm going to want to adjust some environment variables. I want to be able to adjust some values in my deployment file. That's why I'm using this customize, but it's not a must you use it, but it's just good and it helps you customize your deployments. I'm using some conditions here. You remember I mentioned that there are some events that trigger stuff, and there are some also conditions you can add to say, I only want this to trigger when a particular event happens. So I'm saying build and push, build and publish the Docker image, but only set up customize if the condition, if the workflow, if the trigger is a push event. So if GitHub event is push and not pull request, I don't want every time there's a pull request for it to be deploying or to be setting up customize. That's why I'm putting those conditions. It's not like a must, but it's just better. Then the last step we want to do is to deploy it. And I'm also adding a condition to only deploy when it's a commit into master. I don't want it to deploy every time there's a pull request. But let's say you have a staging environment separate. Yes, sure, you can deploy anytime you have pull request to test your deployments before you merge to master. And I'm saying it here, I'm saying run queue and customize edit sets. I want it to replace the image tag. So before we proceed with this, I'm going to save it, and I'll show you why I had to add this customize. If you look at my deployment, I have a deployment file already, which is out of scope of this demo. So I already pasted a deployment file, a manifest for Kubernetes to create a namespace for me, to create a deployment for me as well, with a label called demo, and to also run this container image. So this is the image I'm replacing in my CI. I'm replacing it to replace it with the GitHub share of the pipeline that is running, the commit I made, because that's what we tagged the image as in this step. When we tagged the image, we tagged it with that commit share, GitHub share. So yes, and I have a service. I also have an ingress. All of these are Kubernetes stuff. And ingress is so that I can reach the service from outside my local system. So other people can also reach it, which is what we're going to be testing. So the host I'm using is demo.BukolaJohnson.com. I'm using my domain name, but with a subdomain. And it's going to be listing on port 8080 because the Docker file, also we built it to run on port 8080. So all of this are Kubernetes stuff. So we are going to commit our code. Let's commit our code, our workflow, GKE workflow, create GKE workflow. So let's push it. Let's check out. I should check out a branch before we push GKE workflow. We should have checked out. So, but it's fine. You can always check out afterwards. So you keep an eye on your workflow run. After pushing it, by clicking on these actions. What's happening? Okay, yes, I did not create a pull request. Yes, I guess. Yes, I have to create a pull request to trigger it. So let's put a comments. We create a pull request. Then let's look at the workflow again. Okay, so let's check what's happening in our workflow. It's trying to get a runner. A runner, I told you a runner is a server, like virtual machine. So it's going to run through all those steps we defined in our workflow, all the steps, one after the other. So we're going to be taking a look at it. is running Google GitHub Actions. It's setting up the G Cloud, which is what we defined here. Then after that, it would go to the next step. It goes one step after the other. It's going to run this configure Docker. It has run that. It's setting up credentials now, and it's building. Let's hope it builds successfully. Fingers crossed. If it doesn't build successfully, you can always troubleshoot what happens. That's normal. That's okay. If it doesn't build successfully the first run, you check the errors. That's the good thing. It tells you why it fails, and then you can fix it. Yes. So we have our job still running. Remember, we put a condition for the publish and the set up, customize, and deploy to only run on GitHub push if events is push. So we don't expect those to run. But let's see. We don't expect this two to run. It should only run after we merge this PR into master. Yes, our workflow is green. Publish. Yes, we have it. Nice. So now we are going to create PR. We have our PR. We're going to merge it. We're going to merge our PR so that this can run, so that it can deploy and it can set up, customize, and it can also run. Delete the branch. Keep an eye on the workflow. Okay, so it's running. We can take a look at, while that is running, we can take a look at our registry and see our image. Container registry. Golang demo. So we have 1 minute ago. Yes, our image was pushed 1 minute ago. That's cool. Okay, while that is building, I'll just show you through the documentation because of time. So we looked at this documentation. Sorry, for deploying to Google Kubernetes Engine. There are so many documentation that you can look at to learn GitHub Actions, to understand this. Always come back to these documents and read through. There are so many examples. There are so many things you can do with GitHub Actions. Because what we just did is the basic of it. You can do a lot of automation with it. You can do a lot of adjusting stuff, making it fit your purpose for what you're trying to do. So let's see, we have merge. Let's see if it runs the deploy. Setup customize was skipped. Let's see. If GitHub event is a custom push, if GitHub event is a custom push. Okay. Awesome. Okay. There's a mistake here. It's supposed to be event name. Sorry, that's why it didn't trigger. If GitHub events _ name, that's what it's supposed to be. So we're going to change that. That's why it didn't trigger anyways. Yeah, so let's commit this and try again. Fix events name. Let's see. Where's it here? I'll try again. So because of time, I'm just going to manage that. We can check. Okay, so that's running. Let's see the publish events runs. Yes, so our publish is running now. Cool. Oh yeah, sorry, publish was running before. Our deploy, I mean, not publish. Our deploy run now after we corrected the trigger events, like I mentioned. Okay, so it's deployed, it was created. Let's see what we have in our, because it's the test namespace. Yes, it's running 19 seconds ago. So let's get the ingress. We defined the ingress here already, so we know it's meant to be reachable on demo.BukolaJohnson.com. We're going to try that out. So this was the local one we tested before on my machine. Let's close that and try our endpoint. Yes, nice, cool. So we can reach it from anywhere in the world, like, because I have this domain active and I already have a load balancer, ingress controller in the Kubernetes cluster. So I pointed this entry, I created an A record on my domain to point this entry to the load balancer IP in my cluster. So yes, so that's it. We've been able to deploy, we've been able to build, we've been able to build the code, we've been able to deploy, build the image, push to Google registry, and also deploy to Kubernetes. I hope you have been able to learn a thing or two from this session. And if you have questions, I will be here to answer them and also connect with you after the call. Have a nice day and see you all. Bye.